Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The world is changing, isn't it always? Well, today we're going to look at the three big ways the world has changed and will likely continue to change, not just as a result of the past year and the pandemic, but these were trends in many cases that were already underway and that we just now have to come to terms with what's next for them. Well, we've got the Great Reshuffling as shifting wealth to the exurbs, places outside of the suburbs. The $670 billion college industrial complex is under threat from online school, and the era of big government is back. Lots to talk about, but of course, why you should care about any of these things is exactly the question that yours truly is about to answer.
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, why do you care? Well, things are changing, right? I mean, if you're going to live in this big bad world, then you need to know what direction we're going. And the common theme that I see in these three issues all had to do with money. You know, we're moving, the wealthy are moving out to the exurbs. There's a new word for you. And the idea of a 4-year college is under threat from an online school. And the era of big government is back. What does that mean for all of us? So here we go, folks. Word of the day is one that Justin's been using quite a bit lately, so I thought I'd throw it out there for you. Ubiquitous. 4 syllables. It is an adjective, ubiquitous. It means present or seeming to be present everywhere at the same time. Obvious synonym, omnipresent. And if you want to use it as a noun, then it is ubiquitousness.
Try saying that 10 times fast.
If you want to use it as an adverb, then it would be ubiquitously.
Yeah, that one.
So, it's Justin's word. There it goes. It means omnipresent. It means everywhere.
Yes.
So, big government is everywhere. 1984, George Orwell. Here we go.
And we know, I mean, if you're a longtime listener to the show, we know how much the friendly redneck liberal loves his changes. They're pretty much his favorite thing, just like when his phone company called him up and said, "Hey, we're going to be turning off your phone, but don't you worry, we're going to send you a new one."
Did you see my new phone out in the studio? I got my new phone with me.
Oh, you do?
Yep.
Oh, how's that? How's it going? We're getting a shake of the head and some lip restraint.
It's still
here
a flip.
on.
It's still a flip phone, so it's kind of good, but it's learning how to use all the buttons on it. It's just not good.
It doesn't have the same flow yet. Right?
Nope.
Okay.
But move it up from 3G to 4G.
So Lance has been reshuffled, and so have the move.
Yeah, I don't
of
like
the wealthy
this part because it sounds
exurbs.
like the exurbs are where I live. I don't want these people around me.
You are right. The exurbs would be where you live.
Yeah, because that's where I live, and
out beyond the suburbs.
I live here because I don't want people around me.
Well, they're coming to see you.
Now they're coming.
They're coming.
Okay.
The flow of white-collar workers to fringe outlying communities could reshape everything from transportation to real estate, according to a news analysis from the Wall Street Journal. Basically, fringe outlying communities of major metropolitan regions were prized for their extreme privacy or more affordable housing, or both, before the pandemic, but they were typically much less wealthy than the denser cities and affluent suburbs they surrounded. The Great Reshuffling is likely going to make these far-flung exurbs richer and denser. The median household income across the U.S. exurbs was $74,573 as of 2019. That likely ticked up over the last year as city dwellers in major job centers such as San Francisco and New York relocated to exurbs for the same or similar salaries. In 2019, the median household income in the San Francisco Bay Area was nearly $115,000, and in the New York Metro, it was more than $83,000. So basically what you've got, Lance, is, right, the pandemic showed even more people the value of it, but this was taking place long before COVID, where people were saying, I've heard of this guy. His name's Lance. He's the friendly redneck liberal. And he talks about he's got this space and he's got this wood that he chops and he's got this yard that he mows and he's got this big spread. And that sounds like that could be okay, It
is. It's great.
I'm only 45 minutes from Columbus, and that's for folks, just so that Urbana, which is where we are, is about 45 minutes, at least from this side of Columbus, maybe closer to hour 15 minutes if you're trying to get to the other side. But the point is, it's certainly within a commutable distance. Hey, is that a commutable distance? I think so. It sounds good. Yeah. Sounds good. So what do you think, Lance? They want a piece of this, right? They're coming for you.
They are, which, it's good. And we've seen this locally in the last year or so. Land prices and home prices are going through the roof. We've got a lot of older people who are making hay and making some money off their property, selling it, to people who want to move into the area. But it worries me about, it's just like those inner cities where the millennials got a hold of it and then they started to price people out because, they moved into the area and costs went up. I'm wondering if that's what's going to happen here. That's my negativity taken over. And, the reason those of us who live here chose to live here in the first place and spend our adult life in a place like this was because we wanted to be away. We didn't want to be denser. We didn't want it to have a high cost of living. So it'll be interesting to see if this trend develops, because it is big. It is a change.
Well, and this is kind of interesting because, we're joking about they're coming for Lance, but they kind of really are, because there's a list of the top 13 places that, basically the price benefit is the greatest from moving in this Wall Street Journal article that you can look at. And of the top 13, Ohio's big three cities all make the list. Cleveland is number 1. Columbus is number 12 and Cincinnati is number 11. So they are in fact coming for you, Lance, because it is very cost beneficial, right? If you live in one of those 3 big cities in Ohio, to move out of said city and to an exurb. So and that's kind of interesting. So
no, I mean it is, and it makes total sense, because that's why I chose to move here in the first place and work my entire professional career here.
So people are just catching on finally.
Like I've always said, I'm a trendsetter, right? Drive my pickup truck with my bow tie and sweater vest, and other people tend to follow, and now that becomes a big deal, right? I mean, I've been wearing bow ties for 30 years, and now you see people in bow ties. Oh, wait a minute. And also tennis shoes, right? And that's the new thing on set. All Converse. These people are wearing tennis shoes with their dress clothes, and look at the fashion statement they're making. It's like, been doing that for 30 years, folks. Glad everybody's finally catching up to me.
So the other thing,
don't follow me. Leave me alone. I want to live out here by myself.
And you're doing a podcast. I think this is kind of counterintuitive to being left alone.
That's why I'm the friendly redneck liberal. I'm working both sides of the street at the same time.
So the other thing that
the more the merrier. Come out here, raise my home price, raise the value of my home, so when I'm ready to move here, I can get top
Well, you
dollar.
already own it, so it's just good, right? If it goes up at this point.
Sure, it goes up in value. I just
you can move someplace with less people.
With even less people. That's true. Gonna be looking for those places.
So the other thing that's worth mentioning with this too is, we've talked about before this idea that rural areas could benefit, right, from making it possible for people who need to work in urban centers to live in their areas. They can benefit, obviously, economically. They can benefit culturally. And just to be clear, when I say that, because, we live right in a rural area, and that's not to say that, only the big cities have their culture. I mean, cultures are different everywhere, but the point is that we collectively, the United States, benefit from people cohabitating in areas with people of different opinions, because we're more likely to be empathetic, sympathetic to other points of view if we see those people and we understand how they live and the challenges they face. If they're just in some far-flung place you've never heard of, people in urban communities are more likely to look down on those in rural communities and vice versa. And so I think the positive side of this, right? I mean, there are definitely some downsides to consider, like a huge one is loss of land, right? Population's increasing, need for food is increasing, and we're going to take away land that's needed to produce said food. So, I mean, that's something that has to be mitigated. But there are upsides to it as well. It will improve likely the economies of these places, and hopefully the thing that Lance and I think care a lot about is improving that empathy component that we could all use more of. So not all good. I mean, certainly not across the board, but
the interesting part of it though is that these trends are developing.
Interesting, if nothing else.
Overall, it will be good, all kidding aside, to bring in people and money into these areas will also then bring in some of the better things as well, maybe high-speed internet, more choices, for people to have a bigger tax base, so, and still you're not living at all in the density of a big metropolitan area, which sometimes looks good after you've been in these small rural areas, because sometimes it's nice to live where nobody knows your name. Nobody, one of the things about these exurbs, as we call them, if you are living here, if people don't know your business, they think they know your business. So we'll see how long people stay once that starts to happen to them.
We've got to talk about education, though, coming up. It wouldn't be a show with your friendly redneck liberal if we didn't get to throw in something about the $670 billion college industrial complex. I love that. I love that name. That sums it up so perfectly. But we do want to know your thoughts. What do you think about this shift to the exurbs? Do you live in a place that might be an exurb? Or do you live in a suburb? Have you thought about moving to an exurb? Tell us what you think. Send us an email, podcast@thestateofus.org, podcast@thestateofus.org. What's happening with the $1 billion college industrial complex? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
It would be safe to say that $670 billion is more than Lance and I have ever seen in our life, or will likely ever see in our life. But that is the value of the college industrial complex, and it's under threat from online school. I mean, it's no secret, right, with the pandemic that American colleges and universities certainly took a hit, but in fact, it was their largest drop in cash inflows in decades this past academic year. And that came from not only a drop in in-person enrollment, but keeping in mind that affects room and board too. And I think we often forget that colleges make a huge portion of their money often on offering on-campus housing. We're going to feed you, we're going to house you, and we're going to suck you dry from all your money.
Making rules that you have to participate in it as well.
Correct.
As someone who has two children through that system. Gotta
have the authentic college experience, right, Lance? Yes, very important. Very important. So you gotta live here.
My
for 2
daughters
years.
don't eat at your place, so why do I have to pay for it? Well, because we hired an outside company, and we have to charge this fee to every student if you choose not to use it.
That's your problem.
That's your issue. And
you could have chosen a different school, right?
Yep.
If you didn't like it.
Don't get me started on ways they make money. And then
here's the situation though, right? The affected schools are mostly not for profit, but that's kind of a misnomer in higher education too, because I think there are plenty of schools that are out there that are really truly just trying to benefit students. But even some of your not-for-profits are, we're not technically out to make a profit, but they represent an enterprise with $670 billion in collective revenue, more than $300 billion in debt, and about 3 million employees. And during the height of the outbreak between February 2020 and February 2021, they laid off about 13% of their workforce. Researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia estimate that higher education institutions will lose revenue of between $70 billion and $115 billion over the next 5 years as a result of the pandemic. And this isn't just people that are going to online school, right, Lance? It's also people that are rethinking whether or not college is the right path for them at all. And if it is, maybe doing it in less traditional ways, like that online school or some kind of weekend degree program. And so they may not be taking the room and board that's so important to their business model.
Yeah, I think that's really the big part of it. We know debt is a huge piece of this. And also people found out that, there are certain areas of study that are okay to take online. I don't need hands-on training to do certain majors. And we've seen some more respectable not-for-profit schools like Purdue Global, which is a branch of Purdue University, Southern New Hampshire University, and Arizona State University now rival the big schools with enrollment, so it's another way for people to get that education. And we've also seen that for a lot of college campuses, foreign students were a big part of keeping the doors open as the 21st century started. And because many of them are paying full price, they're not qualifying for, they want to come study in the United States because our education system, as far as higher education is concerned, is still thought to be one of the best in the world. So students want to come from all over and they don't qualify for the local scholarships. And so they're paying full price. But we've seen that drop as world travel has dropped as well. So there are a lot of reasons, it's not just COVID. Another one that I read that I thought was interesting is, I wonder what you thought about this. Google has launched certificate programs.
I was wondering if you get to that.
It says it will treat as the equivalent of a 4-year college for hiring purposes. So who's bigger, the mouse or Google? Is it Disney or Google? Or is it, or does
it's Google?
Does the mouse, because see, to me, the mouse is everywhere. So to me, those are the two people that we have to watch out for, the mouse and Google. Because now Google's saying, yeah, we're not going to open a college, but you can get certificates from Google that if you get these certificates, we at Google will treat them the same as a degree from a 4-year institution when we go to hire people.
It sounds really revolutionary, but really, I think it's Google just exploiting an old idea of upfronting employee training. Because, think about it this way, right? Here's everything that we know our people need to know. And here's what we'd likely be training them on anyway after we hire them, which we end up paying them for. So if we offer all of this, for free per se, right? But it's all administered online. So really, they don't have a lot of administrative overhead, right? So we offer this up front. People can take it, they can get them. And then when they apply, we already know they have what they need. And so we can hire them and we didn't have to pay them to go through all this. And in fact, we might even work out a way where they pay us, right? to get access to it. So, from a business standpoint, super smart. From a, best thing for all of us standpoint, debatable, but it is a very interesting idea, in part because that if somebody like Google does it and if it works, how many other businesses are you going to have rethinking this? And really, they're not the first. We've talked about over the past couple of years, a trend in, I think it was just a year ago, Lance, when we did that episode, where there's trends in businesses taking more of that in-house and being a little less strict on what they expect some people to have up front. Now, a lot of times that's, if you look like the right person for the job, we'll hire you and then train you. So Google's kind of flipping that around, but it's the same idea of the employer providing what they think the people they're going to hire are going to need, rather than going through the slightly more traditional process of getting blanket education in kind of a field and then being hired and then taught the specifics. It's kind of, in some ways, it's skipping some of the blanket information. And I think the downside of this that's important to mention, right, is then if you leave said employer, even though you might be working in the same field, you might not know as much about the field holistically.
But if Google controls 60% of the jobs in the workforce, does it really matter? But it's hard for me to really complain about this because I see it and I agree with you wholeheartedly when we are still educating people in the public school system under the factory model system. Let's go back to the history of education in the United States. The reason we teach people from 7 to 3 is because we are training them to work in the factories. It's the model that we use since the late 1800s, and we still use it today. Now, I will rant and rail against it that it's not the best way to educate young people, but we're doing it because schools were started because we needed to train workers to be able to work in the factory. That's why you have a bell system. That's why you move from place to place. That's why you sit at your chair for hours and do all these rote memorization things, because that's what they needed in the factories.
They're hurting people's brains,
and
Lance.
Even though the factories don't exist anymore or they're on their way out, we're still educating people that way under that model. So this makes, like you said, this makes perfect sense for Google to do this. But I've been out there fighting the windmill for a whole new education system for years. Don't know if we're ever going to get it because, again, other than just the innate love of learning and knowledge, Aristotle and Socrates and those people, you go to school to learn something so you can get a job, right? And if money is an issue, then I don't need all these arts and everything else and the ability to think. I just need the skill to get the job so I can make money and stay alive. So makes sense. I don't necessarily like it, but it makes sense.
Well, we've talked about before, right? You can, for example, listening to The State of Us is a form of receiving, of being educated, right? And
I would hope so.
Yeah. But the point is that we're so often tied to the very quote unquote, and that's right, a misnomer too, the traditional notion of the 20th century, right? Because before that, education also looked different, and hundreds of years before that, it looked different as well. So it's all relative, right? In recent modern history, the quote unquote traditional practice of education was, particularly at schools, the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction. But that doesn't necessarily have to take place at a school or university. And even the subset definitions of education explain that, for example, it can be the theory and practice of teaching, and it can also be a body of knowledge acquired while being educated, hence an education, right? So I think that's important to understand. Part of what Lance is getting at is that doesn't mean that those things can't be valuable. It just means that we're probably going to continue these big trends, right? These three big trends is education is going to continue to be reshuffled to meet the demands of a changing world.
Well, I just took 3 classes this week to renew my coaching license that in the previous 30 years, I took in person. So, in full disclosure, I'm part of this online. Instead of paying somebody else and driving somewhere and sitting for 3 or 4 hours to be taught by an individual to get the certification, I just got my credit card out, sat down at my computer and signed up for the classes and learned whenever I wanted to and never had to leave home. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm just as certified to coach in the state of Ohio as all those people who went and did it in person. So, but hundreds of smaller institutions facing precarious finances, yes, maybe even your alma mater, might not continue if tuition and enrollment pressure outlast the pandemic.
So education, Lance, we could almost say that's a part of big government, right? Public education anyway.
Sure.
It is part of the American...
Well, isn't it the government that says you have to go to school?
Mm-hmm. Sure. If you
are truant, you are violating the law, which is established by said government. If you do not attend school on a regular basis until you're a certain age or get a degree.
Yeah, it's...
so of course it's legal. Of course it's the government.
It's definitely part of the fabric of American society. And I don't think we think about it that way very often, that education isn't really a choice in this country, at least not your K through 12 education. It is generally speaking required, legally speaking. And so I think that that's part of what takes us to the next topic, which is this idea of big government. Because as we talk about, it's almost interesting, they sort of contrast here, right? Industry is pushing changes in education and in some ways taking away from what big government has been providing, and saying, we're going to take some of this on ourselves because you're not meeting the demands that we need you to meet, right? And from a consumer standpoint, there's people saying, yeah, you're not doing it the way that we want to consume it. So there's lots to talk about. Is the era of big government returning? Is this one of the three big changes across the globe that you can expect moving forward? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. That's your guy, Lance, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's favorite president. Ronald Reagan, 1986, folks. The 9 most terrifying words. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. And that's a Republican, so that's not going to drastically surprise anybody. But don't you forget,
he was a Democrat and then changed to become a Republican.
Oh, I shouldn't have brought up Reagan.
Just so we know.
Shouldn't have brought up Reagan. This would get me in trouble with Lance.
He wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool Republican
for even mentioning his name. Well, then was Democrat President Bill Clinton really a Democrat, or was he sort of once a Republican? Because in 1996, he declared the era of big government is over. And I'm sure that Republicans were elated.
No, but President Clinton started as a Democrat and was always a Democrat.
Okay.
Reagan actually changed political parties.
So
in his lifetime. I'm just saying.
But in fairness also, right, you liked President Clinton most of the time and didn't necessarily like President Reagan most of the time either.
Well, yeah, but I don't know what that has to do with the factual information that Reagan wasn't always a Republican.
I didn't say it had to affect the factual information.
But I think we also have to understand that President Clinton came after President Reagan making that statement. And so he was a more moderate Democrat who was trying to take care of some of those issues. People thought they didn't want big government. We were in the middle of the tech growth, which enabled President Clinton to have the last balanced budget in American history because the tech programs were growing so quickly. The government was actually taking in more money than it spent. Oh my God. What a concept that it was a Democrat that did that. But, before you send your emails to podcast@thestateofus.org, I do understand that it wasn't President Clinton that had made it possible for tech to grow at such a rapid pace that filled the coffers of the government. But it is also interesting when we say that he was the last one to have a balanced budget and was a Democrat. But no, I mean, right, the pandemic has brought this to believe that maybe we need big government. That with the vaccines and the processing and getting them out and the stimulus that helped keep the economy moving. And you can say, well, but I don't believe in the vaccine and we don't need the government's hand in the economy. Okay, folks, I just would stop and think enough. Where would we be right now without those things?
It's kind of one of those things too. They talk about the mommy daddy complex in government, right? Which, we can say everything we want about it's a, sexist, old, whatever, out of date. But the point is, it is referred to as this idea that, right, during, good times, the general concept would go that Americans kind of want the government to stay out of the way, and leave us alone and don't be too big and don't be too harsh and just, kind of be nice to us and calm. And caring, but, not in the way. And then the notion goes that when bad things happen, right, like a pandemic, well, now we're upset because, well, where is the government? Why isn't it doing more? Why isn't it helping us? Why isn't it, this, that, and you see different presidents that have talked about this phenomenon. President Obama in his recent book talked about it, especially with Deepwater Horizon and the oil spill, right? Of this idea that Americans were really upset that more wasn't being done. And yet the previous administration and even his administration hadn't really made a priority bolstering the funding of some of the departments that were required to respond to this because people didn't want all that money spent on the government. So it's kind of this weird paradoxical relationship that we have with government of we think we don't want it until we need it, and then we need it and we want it really bad. And then once we think we don't need it, we want it to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And really, there's probably a better balance to be struck there between maybe accept that the hard times might be a little bit harder, but the good times might involve a little bit more government. And then there would be less of this hill and valley crap that we go through. And really that stuff, that's part of what balloons the deficit like crazy, because when there's all these sudden bursts of government spending, the problem becomes that there's no way to budget or allow for that because we're not planning for it.
Well, but I would take it one step further though, Justin, and throw out that not only is it a one-time thing, but then people get used to it and then they start to expect it. And we saw that, if you go with the ACA, Obamacare, it was that, well, no, we don't want to. Well, enough people wanted it. And now that they have it,
they don't want to lose it.
Nobody wants to have that taken away from them. Well, we don't like it. We wish it was better, but nobody's out there saying, take it away. Because, well, now I've got insurance and I didn't before, or I have a choice in my insurance. And, the bigger one I think of is, you want to get rid of big government? Hey, get rid of Social Security. What? We just had 14 people throw their canes at their phones, TVs, radios, however they're listening to us. You can't take my Social Security. Folks, that is the epitome of big government, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
the social welfare state, right?
And I'm not being critical of it. I'm just trying to point out that you're right. There are these big one-time cost issues, but those then turn into things that people, well, you can't get rid of that. I expect that. I need that. I want that. And then it becomes a recurring cost. So you're right. It's also a one-time cost that sometimes turns into a recurring cost. And then we have to have more money for it. And the only way to get more money is to raise taxes. And nobody wants to hear that word, but they don't want to do away with any of the benefits that they're receiving.
It is that.
And that's that peak and valley that you're talking about of love-hate relationship between the American people and their government when it comes to spending.
And a large part of that is to blame on the messaging that we receive, right, of this idea that we can have our cake and eat it too. And you can to an extent, but you kind of have to be willing to give more than we often give. I think we've seen that with ideas of things like universal basic income, right? Not an idea that the vast majority of Americans support yet, but the point is that it's even becoming a mainstream thing that you can run into people that are like, yeah, I think that that's something, or even democratic socialism, right? An example of people becoming more willing to accept big government, and even from the Republican side, right? The less concern with the deficit, the defense of, and the possible shift to the working class, less away from their, big ultra wealthy people.
If you don't want universal basic income, okay, all you got to do is raise people's wages. If you want to encourage people to work, all you have to do is raise their wages. This $300 going for childcare now that people are talking about, if you would raise everybody's hourly rate $3 an hour, they would make $480 off a full-time job. Plus you could tax it and they would still get more than the $300 plus 20 to 30% of it would be paid back in taxes, all by raising their hourly wage by $3. Which would only take the minimum wage to like 11 or 12. And we're talking about 15. So those of you who don't want this, you're saying, oh, we can't have UBI, we can't do this. Just raise wages. And now you're encouraging people to work because they'll bring home more money. There you go. I solved it. That's it. That's all. That's my little step in the rabbit hole. I'm done. Call your congressman, tell him about that. If we just raise wages, folks, we don't have to worry about the social welfare system getting any bigger.
And in fact, it might get smaller, right? Because if
it's so simple it could work, right? It's so simple. It's so simple it would work.
It's so simple.
All you have to do is just raise wages, and it doesn't have to be an astronomical amount. I'm just saying across the board. If you're making $18 an hour now, you'd be making 21.
It is interesting because people do that whole argument of, well, entitlements, unemployment's too much because people can make more on unemployment than they can work in a full-time job. So the answer is let's make unemployment less, or is the answer let's make it so that you make more if you work?
Yes.
And the point is technically both.
I'll vote for you.
Technically both are an answer, right? But
right, they're both options.
Right.
But which one is sending the message that you want to send?
One of them gets us more tax dollars, and the other one gets us less tax dollars without. And here's the big thing, right? Without raising taxes. This is this crazy notion that we all forget is, everybody's like, well, the only options are to cut spending or raise taxes. No, the other option is to make sure that people make more money so that even though we didn't change anything about taxes, we're bringing in more money in taxes, because you're not only bringing in more, right, Lance, on what people are making, but they're also going to spend more money because they have more money, which means that businesses are going to pay more in taxes because people are buying more stuff.
For the first time last year, I had an accountant do my taxes, and I got a second job on top of my retirement. I had to pay taxes. But my accountant said, you know what? Making 77 cents on the dollar is better than making zero. So don't get upset that you're having to pay extra in taxes because you made 77 cents more than per dollar than you would have made if you had just sat down. And that's the part that people lose. Well, the government's going to tax it. Okay, but you're still going to end up with more money. That's, and that's what we want. So I earned more money. And I paid the government more in taxes. We both won. My bank account won and the government won. Which means...
And businesses win.
And businesses win because I bought more stuff.
Okay.
I mean, it's not rocket science, people. Call your Congress people, tell them to listen to the show. We can solve all the problems very simply.
It takes some honest, open, and respectful conversations, though. That sounds something like we say here.
Well, that's what we've had here, right here at True Chat. Our mission is to, as you say, educate people by providing these honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's what we've done. I've been honest, I've been open, and I've tried to be respectful, folks. And you don't have to agree with us, but at least join the conversation. That conversation is what we need to have. It's this, well, I'm not going to talk to you because you don't agree with me. That's got to stop. We have to have these conversations. And when you're having these conversations with your family members or with your coworkers, and they say, well, where are you getting these crazy ideas that actually sound like they might work? You can tell them from the State of Us. And they say, well, how can I get this show? And you tell them Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, everywhere podcasts are found. They can listen, they can join the conversation, and we can have everything fixed within a couple of weeks.
The State of Us is the answer, baby. Just tell people that new episodes are available Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast in the morning. And then you can also hear those same episodes on the weekends in select talk radio markets, AM and FM stations around the country. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, and thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.